Okay, I call the meeting of the Urbana Historic Preservation Commission to order. Could we have roll call, please?
Mr. Dossett.
Here.
Mr. Metcalf. Ms.
He
Novak.
just walked in.
Here.
Mr. Metcalf.
Here. Barely.
Mr. Pagliuso, Miss Pagliuso.
Here.
Mr. Saylor. Seiler. Mr. Shepherd and Ms. Smith.
Okay, we have a quorum. We have no changes to the agenda, so the next item is approval of the minutes of our meeting of January 6th. Lori.
We noticed just a couple of minor changes to the minutes. On page 3, in the middle of the paragraph, I was describing the presentation that I gave. The sentence that starts with "he mentioned," it should say "he mentioned that the property must meet one of the 7 criteria, not 2. Then on page 8, in the third paragraph, there's a sentence about halfway through that says, "This did not reduce his revenue, but it did reduce his ability." That should actually say, "This reduced his revenue and his ability to make
Sorry, can you
renovations to the house."
Clarify again where that is.
Yeah, it's third paragraph
Okay.
down on page 8,
Okay.
halfway through that paragraph. And then one final change on page 9, the third paragraph from the bottom. The last sentence says, "Although only 2 of the criteria were mentioned in the application, he addressed all 7 criteria." That should be followed. That should say he addressed all 7 criteria in his written report, and at the request of the commission, he only addressed criteria A and C, or something of that nature in the minutes. And I think that's about all I have.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Scott?
Just move to accept.
Second. Any other corrections? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Minutes are approved as corrected unanimously. Next item is written communications. Do we have any general written communications? Audience participation. If anybody from the audience who doesn't wish to speak, or who wants to speak about 611, no. Rephrase again. Is there anybody who wishes to speak during this section that does not want to speak about 611 West Elm Street? No one. Next item is continued public hearings. I reopen case number HP-2015-L-01, a request by Brian Adams to designate the Stephen S. Henson House located at 611 West Elm Street as a local landmark. Just to recap where we are at this point, we continued the public hearing originally from our December meeting at the written request of the property owner to allow more time for them. And so we reopened the public hearing for the first time on January 6th, and we went through most of the procedures according to our bylaws in taking testimony, including hearing from the applicant and proponents, as well as the property owner and his representatives during that time. And we were at the point, after 3 hours of public hearing, we were at the point of the commission beginning deliberation, and it was the decision of the commission that we needed more time to go through the memorandum in opposition to historic landmark designation that was provided by the property owner and his group. And so we continued once again, and so that's where we are at this point. Because we've continued this twice and we're still in the process, I will allow for additional public participation. If there's anyone who never had a chance to speak at the last meeting, wasn't at the last meeting, and wishes to speak, I will consider that now. Also, if there's somebody who had a chance to speak before and maybe has new information, that's allowable too. I'm trying to avoid repetition and things that have already been said. Is there anyone who wishes to speak during this part of audience participation? please come forward. If you'd sit on the right side as you approach, please. If you could state your name and also sign in, please.
My name is Ilona Markovsky, and I live in Urbana. I'd like to speak in favor of the landmark nomination tonight. With respect to the nomination criteria, I feel that the building at 611 West Elm Street is an example, an excellent example of a Dutch colonial revival style building, and it has also historical merit. In addition to this, it retains a high degree of integrity. The fact that it needs paint and the roof can be very easily resolved. The porch still retains its original footprint and the roof line, so if somebody wants to restore the porch, can restore it. So I feel that the building as it is greatly contributes to the historic integrity of near downtown West Urbana neighborhood, which is one of our oldest neighborhoods and possesses some of the most historically and architecturally most interesting buildings and valuable buildings in this town. In association with this landmark nomination, I would like to bring up an example of a historic building in a neighboring city that was recently restored and worth looking at what happened there. The building is a 15-story historic building in Indianapolis, which was previously a hotel and fell on hard times. For 20 years it was abandoned, and the company called TWG Development LLC of Indianapolis purchased this building a few years ago in extremely bad condition. If we want to talk about bad condition, this is a building where I would say yes, it was in bad condition. The roof was virtually gone, and the 15 stories were leaking and falling apart. Yet this company, which also is a developer of new buildings, purchased and restored at the expense of $22 million. They are currently renting the newly restored spaces, which are apartment buildings. And one of the first renters there was one of their state senators. Now it's in downtown Indianapolis. And downtown Indianapolis has also seen a lot of redevelopment, and very little of its historic character is retained. So this building contributes tremendously to that. This company, TWG, is one that the city of Urbana is currently considering for a multi-million-dollar downtown new building development. We are very happy that this company knows and is willing to restore historic buildings. Now, as opposed to this, what we have here, we have a building in Urbana at 611 West Elm that retains high architectural integrity. It needs some work. All buildings need work, and if they are ignored for decades, of course, they will have more work to do in them. So we have excellent materials, historic materials, great workmanship, contribution to the historic character of West Urbana, yet the current owners want to demolish this building and put in a new building. I would urge that the current owners reconsider and think about restoring the building and use all the financial incentives that are available. TWG Development LLC would not have been able to restore the building without using a large number of financial incentives that apply to historic buildings and going after the money to do it. So yes, it requires some footwork to do it, but it can be done. In addition to the building, I would like to also talk about the context of this building. It's located right next to the Ricker House, which is not only a local, but it's a national landmark. Why? Because Nathan Ricker was the first person to graduate at the university level in an architecture department. He was the first professor of the official architecture department at this university. He is also the person who designed several historic buildings on the University of Illinois campus. That building was in a very bad shape more than a decade ago when PACA and other interested people decided to restore the building. It was in a very much worse shape, the Ricker building, than 611 West Elm is in. Yet the building was restored, and now we can be proud of that building. In order to retain the integrity, context of the Ricker building, I think it is, we need to leave as many of the historic buildings that surround it in their place. Now, the building that's being proposed for 611 West Elm is essentially a building that's practically entirely made of plastic, made to look like a historic building. Yet, it is not a historic building. It never will be one. It never will have the materials, the craftsmanship, the design of a historic building. It is not a modern building either, because it's not built in the modern style. It's neither fish nor fowl. It's a Disneyland style building imitating a historic building that's still there and still in good shape with high integrity in a historic neighborhood, which should be retained there instead of replacing it with a Disneyland non-place. I think I will close with this, and I would like to again ask the Historic Preservation Commission members to landmark 611 West Elm. One more thing I would like to add. I would like to ask every one of you on the committee to consider the question, what would you like to have next to your house, next to your historic house? If this situation came up in your neighborhood, would you like to have a historic building preserved that retains the historic style of your neighborhood in all aspects? Or would you like to have a 4-story, out of proportion, modern Disneyland all plastic Disneyland apartment building with 15 or 20 new residents? And when you think about it, I'd like you to put yourself in the place of the owner who lives in the Ricker house and is now is the subject of a new redevelopment which is not at all in line with the current character of the neighborhood, in which he also opposes. Also consider if this building would be nominated for landmarking and there was no proposal for a new development, would you landmark it? Would you happily say, yes, it has a high integrity, it's an excellent example of a Dutch colonial revival building, it should be landmarked? Thank you.
Does the property owners team have any questions?
We don't have any questions. I'll have comments later after the presentations are made.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Hello, I'm Richard Cahill. I live at 307 South Orchard. And I wasn't going to speak, but I feel I really have to. I was one of the people that was instrumental in saving the Ricker House. I spent a lot of time at the Ricker House. It was the second package storage warehouse. I mowed the lawn over there for about 3 years. And to me, the 600 block of Green and Elm is, we used to call it ground zero. And the first owners of the Ricker House were the Taylors, and across the street are the Rosses. And we went to numerous meetings as slowly everything on the 600 block other than the Ricker House was torn down on the north side of the street. And then slowly everything happened on the south side of the street. So, and then you go down further on 500 block of Green, and there's not much left. The advantage, the historic context of 611, it does anchor what's left of the 600 block of Elm. As you go further to the east, then you get to all the landmarks. You got Buena Vista Court, you got the 3 houses further on down. To maintain the integrity of what should and could be an historic district, having this house disappear and be replaced by, as aptly put, a Disneyland of vinyl is just going to, you might as well just, that's the last piece on the 600 block to go. And then what's left? I urge you to make this a landmark. I know it's tough going over owner objection, and it's going to go through the council. It's hard, but I think you need to stand your ground and say, yes, this is a landmark. It is a good example of the Dutch colonial. But I think that you have to think the context in the neighborhood, this is a key piece to hold that whole very delicate fabric together. And I urge you to send this to council unanimously as a landmark. Thank you.
No questions, any comments?
Several of you came in late. We've reopened the public hearing for the second time to reopen, third time to have it. If you didn't have a chance to speak at the previous incarnations of the public hearing, you may do so now, or if you've spoken before, you can speak again if you have new information. Does anyone else wish to speak? Yes.
Hello, my name is Jonah Weiskopf, and I live at 307 East Illinois. And I actually lived for a period at 311 West Elm, just down the street from this, for about 3 years. I just wanted to represent a warm-blooded person against the historical designation. Just, you know, to, man, it probably doesn't matter, but it's been a party house for about 10 years, maybe longer. Always a troublesome house. That probably doesn't matter, but as far as, you know, the neighborhood. But I guess my main point would be, if this gets designated historical, I have trouble seeing how almost all the 100-year-old buildings we have aren't somehow sort of historical. And maybe they all are. History is everywhere. But I guess I would be careful about establishing a precedent with this house. I mean, obviously the garage isn't historical, but would that remain? And yeah, so that's really it. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak? Yes.
Just 2 sentences in rebuttal to what was just said. I live right next door to the house. I've been there for 7.5 years. It is not a party house.
Sorry, could you state your name again?
Oh, sorry. My name is Dan Newman. I live at 612 West Green Street. The house that I live next to for the past 7.5 years is not a party house. We've not ever been awakened by or been troubled by any parties in that house. So just to set it straight. Also, the size of the proposed new construction is 2 or 3 times larger than the property that's currently there. So that's something that should be stated for the record.
Madam Chair, I should also...
And, yeah, go ahead. Sorry. And also, the house does not look residential at all. The new proposed structure does not look residential. The scaling of it does not feel residential. So that should be set straight. Thank you.
Thank you. Lori?
I just want to point out, as an opponent spoke previously, that the nominator would have an opportunity to cross-examine that
Oh.
opponent.
Thank you. Mr. Adams, do you wish to ask? No. Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak who didn't have a chance before or who spoke before but has new information? Going? Once, twice? No. Mr. Thies?
People who spoke earlier may want to come up and sign. I just noticed that only 2 people are on the list. Thank you. I'll be brief, as I don't think there's anything particularly new that has been addressed. I'll just comment, first of all, that we are here again. Mr. Hunsinger is here. I also have with me tonight Gary Cole and Andrew Fell, and Steve Whitsitt, as I think we indicated 2 weeks ago, could not be here tonight, and we didn't get any questions that came in, but the others are here if there are questions that the commission has for them. As to the points made, particularly the comparison to the Indianapolis property, it was for that reason that we presented evidence to you as to the economic viability of any new development. It is not to say that this developer wouldn't be interested in something that could be done in an economically viable way, but you look at the Urbana zoning ordinance, you look at the current condition, you look at the dollars that would have to be put in to the property in order to make it economically viable, and Mr. Whitsitt's testimony, I think, made it clear that it just won't work. So the alternative is to let it sit there as is, and a certain kind of landlord might put a few $1,000s into it to try to leave it as it is, and I don't know if it's a party house or not, but that's kind of the point, that that's the property as it sits there is not viable, and to develop it in a way that's consistent with a landmark designation would also not be viable. The suggestion was made that in the new structure, 15 to 20 residents could be there, and I would respectfully submit that as designed, given the zoning and also the design that has been proposed, there won't be 15 to 20 people in that property. It'll be something less than that. Finally, I'll just make a procedural point that we have no other evidence to present unless you have questions of the people that are here tonight. But a procedural point and a request, I don't know if you call it a motion, but one of the emails that you received that is, I guess, in evidence is from a city council member, Mr. Jacobson, and I would ask that you agree or rule that you should not consider that, and that it should be stricken from the record insofar as he is part of the decision-making body. It will be my intent at the city council to ask that he not vote, as he has basically declared his position without consideration of the evidence, which is, I think, what your ordinance requires. So that's my procedural request of you. And other than that, my witnesses are here in case there are questions. But I again want to thank you very much for your participation and giving us the time, and especially I know you came back, and that's appreciated. I know we caused it because we gave you all the material. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Adams, did you have any summary comments? Brian? No? Okay. All right. No one else wishes to speak from the audience? Okay. Deliberation.
Can I ask an easy question?
Mm-hmm.
So do we need to make a motion to strike Eric's comments from the record? I mean, that seems to be the implication. I don't really know the formalities of this. I mean, I don't have the memo in front of me. You know, typically when I am presenting myself in front of the city council, or any other group, I say I'm representing myself. But I don't want to get caught up in some kind of a weird sort of technicality on that. And frankly, I don't think, although I appreciated Eric's input, that it is different from a substantial amount of content that we received that talked about neighborhood context and all of that. I don't know if Lori, do we need to take action on that? What's your feeling about it? I mean, I would be happy to make a motion to have that comment struck from the record if you think it will help us be tighter.
That's really a legal question, so I'm not going to weigh in on that one necessarily. I think it's really up to you to judge whether or not you think you should remove that from the record based on what you heard tonight.
I'd like to ask Gina, this was provided by Gina. Can you talk about how you got this, what the context was, and why you
Yeah,
shared that?
well, actually, the email went to, I believe, all of us. It came after the MOR board meeting, I believe, but prior to landmarking, or the landmark nomination, I believe.
It did.
And I believe that Eric was voicing an opinion based on his own owning of a historic home, and that he felt strongly that we should try to preserve the historic nature of our neighborhoods. I don't know that I don't know if it disqualifies him or not. I thought it should be included because of his strong feeling and because he did address it to all of us.
Mhm.
If it's going to be a sticking point, though, I'd be fine with removing it from the record. I don't want to impede Eric's ability to weigh in on the subject at the city council, if it gets to that.
Okay, procedurally, so we're in the hearing. Can we make other motions within the hearing?
Well, the public hearing is the time when information is presented. If there's information that you do not want to consider as part of your deliberations, then you could certainly point that out. You could make a formal motion for that, sure.
Okay. Then I would entertain a motion to strike the email dated October 3rd by Eric Jacobson from our consideration in this public hearing.
So moved.
Seconded.
It's been moved by Mr. Dossett, seconded by Ms. Palioso. Any discussion? Matt?
I don't. I'm trying to find my words. Because I don't know the legalities, I'm not gonna. That's a hard consideration. But to me, regardless whether he's a member of city council or he's not, he's still a citizen. And to my mind, I want anyone who's a citizen to come and share their thoughts. Specifically as a citizen, other people can share their thoughts. But if you're a citizen, I want you to have an open forum. And okay, so he serves additional office. That's. I don't want to be in the position where I'm saying, no, citizen of Urbana, your testimony, your thoughts are not valued here. And I'm afraid that is what a movement in that direction, by striking that, would do.
I would be okay with it because he didn't know about the landmark application at that time, and it wasn't sent to us within the context of discussing it as evidence within this public hearing.
And it was certainly sent prior to this hearing. Yeah.
Other thoughts? Okay.
Vote on it.
All right, all those in favor of striking the memo dated, what was the date again? October 3rd, written by Eric Jacobson and sent to all historic preservation commissioners signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign.
Nay.
The motion carries. We will strike and not consider the memo dated October 3rd and sent to us individually by Eric Jacobson. Okay. All right, deliberation.
Could I just make a comment? Can the minutes reflect that we don't do this out of any thoughts that Mr. Jacobson's input wasn't and isn't important, but under the interests of a clean legal process and providing him with as many options as possible?
Agreed. All right, deliberation. So we have a nomination for local landmark for 611 West Elm Street that's been nominated under two of our criteria, and those are criterion A and criterion C. We've heard about issues of integrity as well as issues of eligibility throughout the comments that we've heard.
I'll start with the integrity, with C. And I appreciate the additional time for reviewing all the information that was submitted by Mr. Thies. And also, it gave me an opportunity to walk around the building several more times and kind of take a look at it. In our board packet, it talks about all how the Henson House retains some of its historical physical features of the Dutch colonial revival and just colonial revival, retains its distinguished cross gambrel roof with the front bay facing gambrel and a front facing shed dormer. It retains its original clapboard siding and single shingle siding. It retains its denticulated cornice molding and some of its decorative trim. The existing fan window openings in the east and west gable still exist with the keystone-like features above. The west fan light, though, has been boarded up. It retains its original window pattern, but almost all the windows have been replaced with vinyl windows, which do not have the characteristic original divided lights that were in some of the upper sashes. There are a couple of window openings boarded up and one second-floor window opening enlarged for an egress door. Now, although there are historic characteristics that remain, they're in deteriorated or degraded state and not completely intact. These are just some of the observations that I noticed. The existing clapboard siding and shingle siding appear to be in a deteriorated state in many locations. They're both shingles and siding that are damaged and missing. The wood soffits are severely deteriorated. The crown cornice molding at the second eave overhang, second floor eave overhang on the first floor fascia on part of the south and west elevations is covered with a pre-finished aluminum, which I can only assume was due to damage and deterioration. There appears to be water damage and dry rot on many of the existing window frames. There's sills and trim, and there's many missing trim units on those windows. The denticulated cornice appears to be in fairly good shape, but there's an area where it looks like it's degraded somewhat and separating from the fascia. There's missing scroll work on the decorative trim above the upper north-facing gable window, and the southeast brick chimney is crumbling and loose. There are loose bricks on the roof. That being said, it's in my opinion that the Henson House has been altered significantly by the inappropriate alteration with the enclosure of the front porch. The front porch enclosure has eliminated the original front porch, entry front porch with the decorative columns and brick piers. There's no evidence that those still exist within the existing construction. The original roof does remain, and the addition utilizes clapboard siding, which matches the original house siding, but the fenestration is not in scale or character with the house. The windows are not in scale of the original first floor windows. The north pair of windows are double hung. The east window is a sliding window, and the west window is a fixed window unit. The front door, screen door, and trim are non-decorative and plain, and there's no longer a front entry porch, only the concrete stairs. So, that being said, in my opinion, the scale of the entire house has been altered with the porch enclosure, which detracts from the character of the house and it diminishes its historic integrity. I think I agree with the staff findings that it does not meet criteria C. And there are other additions too, like the stair, but that is a code issue and that could easily be removed. There are attic vents in the east and west south gables. There's some things you have to do because of code, but I don't find those as inappropriate as that porch enclosure.
Do you have more comments that you'd like to make now, or can other people comment on integrity?
I think other people can
Okay.
comment.
Integrity comments? Matt?
I wrote an overall statement, but I guess I can try to piece it out. someone else wants to go ahead. I'll find this.
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about this closed-in porch. Staff referred to it as an addition. I would think, for me, a first floor addition would increase the size of the footprint. So I've seen porches filled in, I've seen porches opened back up. The fact that the roof remains, this porch could be, turned back into a porch, which would give it its Dutch colonial revival look again. But yeah, there's a lot of maintenance issues. They can all be addressed with enough money. Replacement windows, there's good-looking wood replacement windows. The vinyl windows could be swapped out as long as the interior trim is in place. It seems like there's still plenty of integrity left for this house.
Did you have
Yeah, I'll take my turn and say that I've got a motion prepared to deny the application. And I think the integrity issues are the major part of that. I think following the demolition of that porch, for which we don't know what's underneath there or what may be available or how it might be reconstructed, the house loses a great deal of its architectural style and makes, in my mind, the careful reading of our ordinance in the context of whether this home, as its current condition implies, is inherently valuable for the study of the style, one step too far for me. I don't think it meets the integrity test, and I never believed that it met criterion A. So I'll throw that out for everyone to consider.
Now I think I'm just going to read this as is, because we've touched on all of it. So, and then it brings up more points. Because I'm with you, Scott. As we talked last week, there's some granularity here that makes this a little bit uncomfortable and is going to polarize us, I think, to a degree. But here's kind of how I reached my conclusions. A couple of the things that we considered was how much of the property do we take into account, which is kind of what you just brought up. And I said Mr. Thies argued on behalf of Mr. Hunsinger that we should only consider the house itself. Unfortunately, that's not realistic. It would make this process much simpler, certainly, but houses, like people, exist in context. Therefore, historic preservation, which seeks to preserve and reinvigorate existing structures that give residents a sense of place, must also consider that context. I would further argue that this is not specific to this case, but is inherent to all preservation considerations everywhere. To me, that is a universal. You can't just say, boop, here's this little thing in the middle of nowhere and say, well, that's the thing we have to consider. Inherent to an understanding of its place is the context in which it resides. And then I also wanted to bring up the fact that that there was some discussion about our ordinances as a whole and whether they were valid or not. And I thought I wanted to comment about Mr. Cole bringing definitely some interesting ideas to the table, and that I agreed in part with him that there are parts that are pretty flimsy. To my mind, we need a stronger and broader historic preservation ordinance that commits more strongly and more thoroughly to the values implied in our city ordinances. And while I love Mr. Cole's idea of plain language and a plain language document, the fact that we have heard testimony regarding some of this granularity makes me wonder if that's the best route. But that's for the future. For now, we have this ordinance, and we have to move forward presuming that it is representative to the minds and hearts of our residents. And then lastly, what are we here to do for this? Mr. Cole mentioned last week that economic sustainability was our primary responsibility. And I consider that to be a misinterpretation. Economic considerations are on our radar per the 1998 Urbana Historic Preservation Ordinance, which guides the policies of the city and by extension what we do here on the commission. However, that is one of several historic preservation goals outlined by the city and also happens to come after, quote, promote preservation of Urbana's historic resources. I take economics into account in what I'm going to say, but I will not privilege it. In short, my comments are going to address the home and its location, the specific case before us as understood in the context of the Historic Preservation Ordinance that led to the creation of this commission, and in the spirit of balance of priorities that we have to consider if we are to effectively advise City Council as per our mandate. So Chairperson Novak instructed the commissioners to focus on the application, so I will do so here and share my conclusions. Section A on architectural value. I thought Mr. Adams did a fine job of presenting what he found to be special about the home, and so thank you very much for investing the time in this project. Mr. Adams notes that the original owner, Mr. Henson, was best known as a significant contributor to the Villa Grove community. His presence in Urbana does tell a story about the economic connectivity of Central Illinois of the period, though that was not highlighted in the nomination. And while his fame is perhaps more relevant to Douglas County, historic preservation is not always about telling the story of a locally famous person. Preservation seeks to share the built environment with the next generation in a way that tells the story of all people and contributes to a community. It's my opinion that 611 West Elm does not qualify as a local landmark based on the argument made in Mr. Adams' nomination under Criterion A. Criterion C. The second criterion highlighted by Mr. Adams is that of being representative of the distinguishing characteristics of an architectural type. While I respect Mr. Garcia's work and find him to be a very capable city planner, my own training in history and historic preservation has given me a different assessment of what's happening on the site. Mr. Garcia references 7 characteristics of a structure's integrity. And my own visit to 611 West Elm, like him, I had to go see it myself and what was there. And to my mind, it does have certainly integrity of location. The house has not been moved off its site. Its setting has been diminished by the construction of large apartment complexes nearby, but in connection with the Ricker House, I do believe that that setting has merit, as do several other local residents who wrote in favor of the nomination, our city council friend notwithstanding. The materials and design do not generally have seemed to have been substantially altered other than in the area of the porch, which I'm going to come to in a minute. But the other things, as Miss Appel, that spoke with Mr. Adams, noted in her testimony, and which Mr. Garcia also notes in his report. The exception, as we're discussing, does seem to be the porch. Is the former porch an addition or an alteration? To my mind, speaking in plain language, an addition constitutes a new structure that was not part of the original construction. The porch is still there. The dental moldings appear to be in the same place in the 1909 and 2015 photographs. To my mind, that is evidence that the intent was not to build an entirely new structure onto the home, but rather to enclose an already existing part of it. And bigger picture, this is more than just porch and windows. We have to consider the entire house as a whole. So it's my belief that it maintains a high degree of integrity, or a significant enough degree of integrity to qualify. Now, the Dutch colonial revival is a subset of the larger colonial revival style. Virginia McAllister's primer, which was, I think may have been in your report too, but it was also in the fine packet that Mr. Thies put together. An outstanding resource for identification, but it does not address the bigger historical context. During this period, builders sought to emulate styles of the past. Colonial revival structures of all forms celebrate the past, but do not attempt to directly recreate it. Just like we might choose to build a home today with paired end chimneys, we would not likely use those fireplaces for cooking as they did in the 1700s, nor would we forsake using drywall and insulation to keep the heat in, a luxury those in the 1700s did not have. In short, we today use technology of the period just as those at the turn of the 20th century did to construct homes that are popular in the period. A strict interpretation of McAllister's building forms, especially in this tricky architectural period, fails to consider local styles and personal tastes that were so prevalent in this mix-and-match architectural period. In short, its lack of precision as to being a typical style, as outlined by McAllister, is exactly what the period was about, choosing what worked best for the person who constructed it. So to my mind, it absolutely fulfills Criterion C. So as a result, I do find that this home, even in its current imperfect state, meets both the spirit and the letter of the claims made by Mr. Adams in his application. One other note. as per the degradation on the property, I'm disappointed that it got to that point. And we see this far too often in our town. And allowing a property to slowly degrade and then saying, oops, guess I have to tear it down and build new, is entirely unacceptable. As far as this commissioner is concerned, the passivity of demolition by neglect actively subverts the will of the residents of this city in creating a historic preservation ordinance in the first place. Now, I will say, I don't know that that was the intent or the spirit here. I don't know that. But by the testimony of Mr. Whitsett, much of the degradation that has taken place on the property started within the last 10 years, which is in the current scope of the present ownership. Further, we knew, the owner knew that when the property was purchased that it resided in an MOR, mixed office residential zone. Their proposal, which is slightly tangential, doesn't include any office space, but we did address that. And that a structure of this age, so you knew you were going to have to deal with MOR, and a structure of this age could very likely end up at some point in the jurisdiction of the Historic Preservation Commission. So I'm empathetic to the challenges of creating properties of value, but I believe historic preservation can do that. And there's a wealth of research that shows the proper, well-timed, consistent investment in historic neighborhoods revitalizes them and makes them jewels of the city. There are prices to doing business, and that's a risk, and I can't ask, as a representative of the people of the city, I cannot ask them to absorb that cost. It was known what the status of the structure was. 10 years have gone by, things have gone to pot. Maybe not, it's a little dramatic, but some things have degraded. But to lose that historic structure in the context of, okay, well, we let it fall apart, that's the way it goes. I'm empathetic, but I'm not convinced. So I support the nomination as presented.
Gina, do you want to weigh in or wait?
Okay. I didn't prepare anything in writing. I've walked around this house 3 or 4 times now, and I kind of have a soft spot for it in my heart because my house is about 115 years old. And when I bought it 7.5 years ago, it was in about the same shape as this house. It had been split into 2 apartments long ago. I have what my contractor called a mother-in-law door, quite like the door that's on 611 West Elm that had a staircase to it that was removed a long time ago. So I have a door to nowhere, just like 611 West Elm could have if the staircase was removed. I have 110-year-old clapboards. I have 110-year-old shingles. I have a 110-year-old fan light. I have a 110-year-old spike above my fan light. I love my house. I love that it's historic. I love that I'm on this commission. I love that our town is willing to invest in historic preservation. I also I'm not here to stop development. I'm grateful for all of the great landlords that we have in our town. I'm grateful for the people, I believe we had someone that spoke 2 weeks ago that has bought a house on Elm, the old Halberstadt house, a couple of other properties in town, and turned them into student housing that are individual rooms with common areas. And, they put money into it, but they're making money on those properties. I don't know when the ordinance went in that said that you can no longer rent to 6 unrelated individuals, but I know that there are more than 6 rooms in the houses that this couple owns, and they rent out to undergrad students. They're rooming houses. We have provisions for rooming houses in our ordinances. And even in the MOR, we have provisions for rooming houses, which have common areas and separate bedrooms. And you can rent to more than 4 people in those buildings. So, again, I've walked around this house quite a few times, 3 or 4 times probably. I also, just for the heck of it, did a little research on building permits, past building permits. I did find that in 1975 a building permit was issued to remove the front porch. So the new porch is definitely the old porch is gone. It was demolished in 1975, but it does retain the original footprint. It does retain the original dental work. The roof line is identical. I had to replace my porch a few years ago. People might have driven by on Vine Street and seen this big tarp put up. But we made it the same footprint. We followed the original architecture. And I think it came out great. I feel blessed to be the steward of this property. This house is owned by a particular individual. There are a lot of historic homes in Urbana. Owned by, they're stewards of. These people that own these properties, I'm one of them. I'm a steward of my property. Everyone that owns an old home in Urbana is a steward of that property. This is our history. It's the city's history. It's the history of where we've been. It brings us to the present, and it brings us into the future. I love that people drive by my house in Rubberneck. Oh my God, look at that place. I know 611 West Elm. When I drive by that, I always look at that house. Just because I think it's a cool house. I know it's got problems. I needed a new roof. I needed a new HVAC system. There were a lot of problems in my house. I'm not trying to rent it out to people. It is my own private residence. Thank God. I know that there are a lot of stumbling blocks in the way of turning this residence into something that could be a profitable entity. The economics of this, if we decide to landmark it, and the city council agrees, the economics would come in down the road. They would come in through an economic hardship request, through certificates of appropriateness. I think we have a lot of checks and balances in our ordinance and in the procedures. And I'm with Matt. I don't believe in demolition by neglect. We've seen it happen over and over again in this city. City council months ago talked about demolition by neglect for the property at the corner of Race and Green, where things we just kind of say, all right, well, it's time to rip it down because it's too far gone. Nothing's too far gone. Or at least in my mind, I don't think this house is too far gone. The pictures of the interior are incredible. What craftsmanship inside that house. It blows my mind. My house doesn't look like that inside. My house is just a really simple, an old farmer's house. This house is much more grand than my house could ever be. So I tend to agree with Matt. I think the integrity of this house is there. Even though there are problems that need to be overcome, I believe the original footprint is there. And like the Ricker House, the front porch has been replaced. That doesn't mean that the Ricker House can no longer be a landmark. That doesn't mean that 611 West Elm shouldn't be a landmark. I also looked closely at the pictures, the older pictures of this house, and it looks like the original windows were 1/1s, which is what's in there now. They're vinyl, but they're 1/1s. And in a lot of cases, when old windows are replaced, they're made much smaller. Plywood is put in. Windows are made to be whatever is on the shelf. And these weren't. These were made to fit those openings. So I think I side with Matt on this. I think that criteria C has been met through the nomination, through my observation. So I guess that's where I stand on that for now.
Okay. With regard to the house's integrity, I do find that the house has a high degree of integrity. I appreciate the testimony of Mr. Otto and Mr. Newman in highlighting Section 8 of how to evaluate the integrity of property in National Register Bulletin 15, how to apply the National Register criteria for evaluation, which the staff also partially referenced in their report. On page 46, criterion C of the bulletin notes a property that has lost some historic materials or details can be eligible if it retains a majority of features that illustrate its style in terms of the massing, spatial relationships, proportion, patterns of windows and doors, texture of materials, and ornamentation. The intact features of this house include massing, footprint, including what some people have referred to as a small rear addition that is not, as evidenced on the Sanborn maps. Wall material, including first-story narrow-gauge clapboard and second-story wood shingle. Roof shape, the cross-gambrel roof. Fenestration pattern. The window openings are unchanged except for the addition of an exterior staircase where a door was inserted into a window space on the east elevation. And the architectural detailing, which is outstanding. And this includes rectangular leaded glass windows, denticulated cornice on the front porch, the front east shed dormer, and the first-story semi-hexagonal bay. Triple course wood shingle round arches that surround fan lights with exaggerated wooden keys at the attic ends of the east and west gambrels. Paired second-story facade windows on the main facade with shaped hood mold which connects to an attic-level rectangular sash, which appears to be leaded glass, and the very unique application of wood shingle to the rake boards on all of the gambrel ends. I do find that the 7 degrees of integrity as defined by the National Register have been met, including location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. The integrity issues of the house located at 611 West Elm Street, including an east elevation exterior wooden staircase and the enclosure of the front porch, are clearly outweighed by the numerous intact features of the original house. I also agree that the house is eligible under criterion A, significant value as part of the architectural, artistic, civic, cultural, economic, educational, ethnic, political, or social heritage of the nation, state, or community. I took that all along to mean one of those, not all, it does say or, and I took it to mean architectural value in our community. The application well establishes the architectural context for the house. We can all easily picture that Elm Street was an original street of the city, a major street leading from the downtown. It became one of the 2 most prestigious streets, along with Green Street, to live on. And Mr. Adams talks about, through the latter half of the 19th century, the number of people, movers and shakers in the community that all lived on Elm Street, including 5 mayors, 2 Illinois state senators, Champaign County judges, urban industrialists, and the like. He also discusses how originally it was a park or garden-like setting on the western end of town, which would have been a close end of the downtown at that time. And then McCullough Street to Lincoln Avenue in the later 1800s were larger estates occupied by the wealthiest and most outstanding people in the city who built large and elegant residences on the estates. One of the very few structures remaining on West Elm Street from the elegant buildings built in the last part of the 19th century and early 20th centuries then is 611 West Elm Street. The significance is architectural heritage in the context of this elegant near downtown street, which is a continuum of the aristocratic development that had begun in the late 19th century. Under criterion C, I find that the building is representative of the distinguishing characteristics of an architectural type inherently valuable for the study of the period, style, craftsmanship, method of construction, or use of indigenous materials while retaining a high degree of integrity. At a very minimum, this is a well-detailed example of Dutch colonial revival style. Baroque influence, classical influence, and more has been noted in the testimony, along with a variety of expressions of style found on examples throughout the West Urbana neighborhood. But again, the established context for this house is this particular area of the neighborhood, this vestige of an aristocratic residential development, which was on an original street as an extension of the downtown. Dave?
Well, I can't say it as well as you do, but I came into this a little late because I missed the last couple meetings, but based on what I've read, I acknowledge that the house has been gotten behind on its maintenance. I think it's still architecturally significant, and there's still enough integrity left to nominate it.
I did want to address the issue of condition versus integrity. We don't have that specifically defined, but National Register goes into some detail about the separation of condition versus integrity, that it is possible to have a property in quite poor condition that could still have a high degree of integrity. The intertwining of those two terms comes from condition that is so particularly severely horrible that you no longer can interpret the integrity or the honesty of the building as it was originally expressed, and that's absolutely not the case in this situation. Matt?
I agree.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think, future nominations, one of the things that was brought up in the staff report was that there are several other Dutch colonial revival style homes. None of them have been brought to us, and we can have, as Ms. Pearson pointed out, we can have several of them on the 100 most fantastic houses in Urbana list, but until a nomination is written on them, there's nothing we can do about that. And so this is the first one that's been brought to us. I do believe it has a degree of integrity despite its condition, and I'm grateful that you helped to clarify that.
Any further discussion, or does someone want to make a motion?
I move that we accept the nomination of 611 West Elm to the register
You need
as
to,
a landmark.
you need to clarify what criteria.
Under criteria is A and C.
And, is there a second on the motion?
I'll second it.
Been seconded by Mr. Seiler. Do we need to include all of the findings in the motion?
You should certainly include any reasons as to why it meets each of those criteria, yes.
And other things as well. The staff report had suggested that it was considered under didn't meet other criteria, that it wasn't even nominated for and such too. Is that appropriate as well in the findings?
At a minimum, you would need to respond to the criterias that are addressed in the motion. If you wanted to dismiss the other criteria, that would present a very clear record.
Okay. I did come up with some findings. If
I would value your addition.
it's a bit lengthy. Finding number 1, Article 7 of the Urbana Zoning Ordinance provides the City of Urbana the authority to designate local landmarks and historic districts with the stated purpose of promoting the educational, cultural, economic, and general welfare of the community. A couple of these are similar to what staff had produced in the original findings. The City of Urbana on October 16th, 2015 received a landmark application to designate the property located at 611 West Elm Street as a local landmark. The application was deemed complete by staff on October 26th, 2015. The Urbana Historic Preservation Commission opened a public hearing on December 2nd, 2015, which pursuant to a written request from the property owner was continued and held on January 6th, 2016, which was continued and held again on January 20th to consider the landmark designation of the subject property. The continuance to January 20th was a majority vote of the commission, with commissioners needing extra time to review the memorandum in opposition to the historic landmark designation of the property located at 611 West Elm Street, which had just been provided to commissioners that afternoon. The house located at 611 West Elm Street was constructed circa 1902 in the Dutch Colonial Revival architectural style. The house located at 611 West Elm Street meets criterion A, having significant value as part of the architectural, artistic, civic, cultural, economic, educational, ethnic, political, or social heritage of the nation, state, or community. The house represents a continuum of houses built on one of the city's original streets by some of the city's prominent citizens. The house located at 611 West Elm Street meets criterion C, as it is representative of the distinguishing characteristics of the Dutch Colonial Revival architectural style and retains a high degree of integrity, retaining its original massing, footprint, wall material, with narrow gauge clapboard on the first story and second story wood shingle, cross gambrel roof, fenestration pattern, and architectural detailing, including rectangular leaded glass windows, denticulated cornice on the enclosed porch, the front east shed dormer, and the first story semi-hexagonal bay. Triple course wood shingle round arches surrounding fan lights with exaggerated wood keys at the attic ends, east-west ends of the gambrel. Paired second story facade windows with shaped hood mold which connects to an attic-level rectangular sash of leaded glass, and the very unique application of wood shingle to the rake boards on all gambrels. The integrity issues of the house located at 611 West Elm Street, including an east elevation exterior wood staircase and the enclosure of a front porch, are outweighed by the numerous intact original features of the house. The applicant did not nominate the house located at 611 West Elm Street under any of the other criteria, including B, D, E, F, and G. Thus, the commission did not consider the eligibility of the house under those criteria.
So moved.
So there's a
Do we
motion on the
vote?
floor, so you're
That I-
accepting these.
I accept these additions to the nomination and wish to have them incorporated in our vote.
And does the seconder agree?
I do.
Okay. Additional discussion?
A point of information, have we followed the appropriate procedure, Ms. Pearson?
Yes, you provided the motion and then amended the motion, and that amendment was accepted. So yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Are there any other details or qualities that anybody wants to add to the findings? All right, ready for a vote? Terry, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Metcalf,
Yes.
Ms. Novak,
Yes.
Ms. Pagliuso,
Yes.
Mr. Saylor,
Yes.
Ms. Smith,
No.
and Mr. Dossett.
No.
Motion carries by a majority vote and has at least the 3 required votes in favor as required by the ordinance. Upon reaching the decision, then, we need to also agree that we did not rely on any materials, information, or communication received outside of the formal hearing process. Agreed? Yes,
Yes.
thank you. I now,
Should close the
I-
public hearing.
yes, I was looking for the number. I hereby close case number HP-2015-L-01, a request by Brian Adams to designate the Stephen Henson House located at 611 West Elm Street as a historic landmark. Do we have any information on when this might be scheduled for council?
The earliest available date is February 1st.
Okay. I thank everyone in the audience for your participation, and we'll continue with our regular business. We have no old business, no new public hearings or new business. Next, we have monitoring of historic properties, including the Mumford House.
Oh, wait, old business? Can we get an update from Scott on the meeting for the Huna meeting?
Sure, yeah. We had 25 folks come over to the library, and a lot of good input. 4 staff people. And I thought we developed a good list of concerns about the impact to the neighborhood from a 4-story, 200 or so unit building. And with Councilman Roberts' help, we're providing feedback to the Development Corporation, and a lot of some concerns, the most sharp concerns from the floor, came about kind of what the revenue taxing sort of details about the property would be, which we don't know anything about that yet, first of all. There were other significant concerns voiced about parking, whether these people are actually counting as many cars as they will have. The drainage issues related, all the things, related to having this 4-story building. The developer has shown some flexibility in terms of where some townhomes may be to kind of soften the edges of the building, but it's really going to take getting kind of their first design document for us to know, what we think about it. Gina was there, so she might have other comment to make if she wants.
Yeah, I was there. It was a really well-attended meeting. I got a lot of good information, I thought, and some questions answered. And I agree with Scott in that, there were definitely some concerns on the tax base and parking and water retention or water disbursement, or if there would be commercial space on the first floor, on the ground level, and wouldn't it be cool if we had like an outdoor cafe on Vine Street, which I'm down with that. I think that I think there were concerns about the property that was kind of highlighted as what the new developer was comparing, something that they had built to what they might put here. So I know I had some concerns about what that would look like. So Scott, I was just wondering if you could, for anybody at home that might be watching, let them know where they can supply comments or who they should send comments to for this design phase, for public input.
I think we'll probably focus on that a little bit when we actually have a design, but certainly the Historic East Urbana neighborhood has a Facebook page, and there's a lot of dialogue going on there. It's open to whoever wants to do it. At some point in time, I'll probably start taking comments, but I think I'll wait until we actually have some kind of a draft to kind of put myself out on the line for taking feedback from people. So.
Okay, now we have Mumford House, please.
We put that on
Oh,
here
okay.
because Matt last time brought it
Okay.
up.
Um,
Nothing from us.
I don't know, I don't think the commission ever responded to the descendant with a letter, so, is that something we can, if I were to draft a letter, can it be sent out through you guys for commission approval or review?
I think the chair has some discretion to write a letter if it's in keeping with any discussion that you've had. Unless the commission feels differently, I'm not sure you need to vote on it necessarily. But if you'd like their review,
Okay,
we can send that out. It's
All
not I should point out, it's not a topic, it's not a case.
right,
It's a separate item.
right, okay.
That's great. Thank you.
Any other monitoring of historic properties of concern from anyone?
I just kind of have a follow-up about the library we talked about a couple weeks ago. There was an article in yesterday's Gazette, again, talking about fundraising for the library, and there's a paragraph that says, the needed repairs for the front porch will be about $250,000, and then I'm quoting from the newspaper, the bill, likely covering disassembly of the porch and pouring of new footings, has been anticipated for a while, but the library already has its hands full with replacing the air handler and furnace that are in danger of going out. The large glass windows, another aspect of the historic look, are leaking air in and out, racking up big power bills. So that's been on my radar since the first time I noticed that there was something going out there about, updating the front porch of the library. So I'm just concerned about, and I just wanted to bring it to the commission's attention that there was another article out there that, again, addressed the windows on the porch. So I just wanted that to be on everybody's radar.
Thank you.
Did the article, or does anyone have any information about when the library will make those kinds of decisions, in terms of when they might pull the trigger on making such an investment? Because I'm sure the longer it goes on, the more it's going to cost.
The article didn't have any kind of a time step on any of these issues, so.
Does staff have any information in that regard?
As I stated at the last meeting, the library indicated that they are really in the early phases of planning for all of this work. As the article pointed out, there's way too much work and not enough money, so they need to prioritize and figure out what needs to happen first. So no timeline.
They would need a certificate of appropriateness?
No,
for
they're not
that?
a landmark.
Oh, they are a landmark.
Mm-mm. Nope. Any other monitoring? Any staff report?
All right. I think I'm not sure if I shared this with everybody or just with you, Alice. But a few months ago, I received a letter that was addressed to me, Rebecca Bird, and it was an invitation for the commission to tour Restoration Works, which is up in, I believe it's Bradley, Illinois. It's up by Kankakee, and they restore old windows or historic windows. And it looks like they do a really good job of it. And also in conjunction with that, there's a Frank Lloyd Wright house up there that we could also tour. So I contacted them again, and I received a reply just yesterday. And the owner said, yeah, we'd love to have you. Let me know, give me a call, and we can work out the logistics. So we were thinking maybe that would be a good thing to do. Probably not when the weather's bad, and maybe when, maybe in May for Historic Preservation Month. So if there's interest from the commission, I can certainly look into pulling together the logistics for that.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they do fantastic work. One of our local landmarks used them on, I forget the address, 600 block of West Pennsylvania. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I want to say 607, but I don't know why that's in my head. Oh, Lori's looking at the.
Might be. It would be even number 60.
604.
Yeah.
Colvin House.
That's it.
Okay, that's what I said.
All right, is there a staff report? Nope, can't blame you on that. No study session, any announcements? I assume that we will not have a meeting.
We have not received any applications, so I wouldn't envision a meeting being needed. We've
Okay.
worked you hard enough this month, right?
So, so then our next meeting likely would be early March. And even if we don't have any business, I'd like to go back to our too ambitious of a education efforts and things that we talked about that we never did anything about. So maybe we could come prepared in March to do something
yeah.
about them. Guilty.
Is it too
on
early
my
to,
part.
to talk about the planning of the event that you've been thinking about?
We don't have a date yet, but
Okay. But that might end up being planned prior to the
yeah,
meeting,
that's
is what I'm
true.
suggesting.
Is that Brian Adams and I are going to do a how to research your old house session that will hopefully be in the Urbana Library. So that'll at least get things rolling and hopefully some positive publicity.
Good, yeah.
So we'll let you know when that's been determined and such. Any other announcements? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.